Part 1. A Long Journey of Memories. The world around Violetta was slowly quieting down. The leaves outside her house fell to the ground, swirling in the cold wind. The room was silent, with only the ticking of the old clock on the wall marking the passage of time. Violetta had recently turned 80 years old, and she found herself reflecting more and more on the life she had lived. In her youth, she was known for her beauty. Many in the small town admired her delicate features, long dark hair, and graceful figure. But time spares no one, and Violetta was no exception. Now her face was lined with deep wrinkles, and her hair had long since lost its shine, turning grey. Sometimes she stood in front of the mirror, trying to catch a glimpse of the girl who had once been the centre of attention. But every time her gaze lingered on her reflection, she saw the signs of age that had inexorably marked her. How fast time flies, she thought. However, memories of her former beauty only weighed on her heart. Once she loved walking through the village, basking in the admiring glances, but now it seemed to her that she had become invisible. Her husband had passed away several years ago, and her children and grandchildren visited infrequently. She felt forgotten, like an old tree standing alone in the forest, covered in moss and losing its leaves. Part 2. Conversations with the Mirror. The morning started as usual. Violetta slowly got out of bed, put on her cosy slippers, and walked over to the mirror in her bedroom. She habitually smoothed a strand of grey hair and looked closely at her reflection. "Who are you now?" she quietly asked the woman in the mirror. Her gaze travelled over the deep wrinkles on her forehead, the sagging eyelids that had once been full of youth and life. It seemed that those eyes, though still clear, no longer sparkled as they once did. She had always been proud of her eyes, large, brown, with a deep gaze that had captivated her husband, Igor, many years ago. It was both pleasant and painful to remember. Violetta recalled how they would walk in the park together, how he would take her hand, and how she would catch the admiring looks of passers-by. "How beautiful I was then," she sighed, still gazing into the mirror. But now, seeing her reflection, she could no longer feel that pride. Her appearance had vanished, like summer giving way to the autumn of life. "Igor wouldn't recognize me now," she thought. But then her mind wandered to the past. Igor had always told her he loved her not for her appearance, but for her soul, for her kindness and heart. Yet it was difficult to accept that the beauty she had once prided herself on was no longer hers. Part 3. An Unexpected Visit. The next day, her solitude was interrupted by a sudden knock on the door. Violetta wasn't expecting anyone, and with a hint of surprise, she went to answer. Standing on the doorstep was a young woman she barely recognized. It was Anya, the neighbor's daughter who often visited when she was little. Anya had grown up, and now she was a true beauty. Tall, slender, with long hair styled in neat curls, she stood at the door with a warm smile. "Aunt Violetta, may I come in for tea?" the girl asked cheerfully. Violetta, pleasantly surprised by the visit, agreed. She was glad that someone had remembered her. She set the kettle on the stove, prepared some cookies, and they sat down at the kitchen table. Anya started talking about her studies, her job, and how she wanted to become a doctor. But all the while Anya was speaking, Violetta couldn't shake the thought of how young and beautiful the girl was. "What a fresh look she has," Violetta thought, glancing at Anya's sparkling eyes. In that moment, Violetta felt a growing bitterness inside her heart. Her youth was gone, but this girl had everything still ahead of her. "Aunt Violetta, you've always been so beautiful," Anya suddenly said, breaking her thoughts. "I used to look up to you as a child and dreamed of being like you when I grew up." Violetta was stunned. She had no idea that Anya had ever thought this way. But her heart was too heavy with her own thoughts to take the compliment to heart. It seemed to her that such praise belonged to a distant past, and now it no longer mattered. Part 4. Nighttime Reflections. After Anya left, Violetta couldn't sleep for a long time. Her mind kept returning to the words the young woman had said at the table. She remembered how, in her youth, she was often complimented, but those times seemed so distant now. It felt like her beauty had vanished, just like the people who once surrounded her. Violetta decided to step out onto the veranda and breathe in the cool night air. The sky was clear, the stars shone brightly, and she sat on an old rocking chair, lost in her thoughts. For some reason, her mother's words came to mind. Her mother had always told her, "Beauty is not just what you see with your eyes. It's what's in your heart." Back then, as a young girl, Violetta had laughed at those words. To her, beauty was exactly what you could see. But now, after so many years, she began to wonder. Maybe her mother had been right. Maybe true beauty doesn't fade with age. Part 5. A Meeting with a Wise Man. One day, while walking through the park, Violetta saw an old man sitting on a bench. She recognized him as a former literature teacher, respected throughout the town for his wisdom and intellect. The man was also elderly, but his eyes still sparkled with a unique vitality. Violetta approached him, and they started talking. He was a kind conversationalist, and soon Violetta opened up to him, sharing her worries. She confessed her struggle with feeling unattractive and unwanted now that her external beauty had faded. The teacher listened to her carefully and then spoke. "You know, Violetta, our appearance is like the cover of a book. In youth, it's bright and attracts attention. But as the years go by, the pages of the book become more valuable. People begin to read between the lines. They see not just the beautiful cover, but the deep meanings within. We grow older, but beauty remains in how we've lived our lives, in what we've done for others, how we've loved and cared." Violetta pondered his words. Could it be that outer beauty really wasn't the only measure of her worth? Maybe she had been able to keep that inner beauty, which her loved ones had always seen in her. Part 6. A Change in Perspective. After her conversation with the teacher, Violetta began to look at her life differently. She started to remember the moments that had made her happy and realized that beauty had always been present in her life, but not in the way she had thought. She recalled raising her children, how she supported her husband during difficult times. She thought again about her grandchildren who, though they visited rarely, always called with warm words. She remembered helping her neighbours, tending to her garden, and finding joy in every new flower that bloomed. Each of these moments, she now believed, was a manifestation of that very inner beauty that couldn't be seen in a mirror. Violetta realized that her value lay not only in her appearance, but in her actions, in the love she had given to people. Part 7. Finding Peace. With each passing day, Violetta began to accept herself more and more. She no longer looked in the mirror with sadness. Instead, she started to see a woman who had lived a long and worthy life. Her wrinkles no longer seemed to her like flaws. They were marks of her life's journey, each one telling its own story. Violetta understood that her beauty had never truly disappeared. It had simply changed form. Now her beauty was not in youthful looks, but in her experience, wisdom, and kindness. Part 8. A New Outlook. One day, Violetta decided to meet with Anya again. She invited the young woman over for tea, and during their conversation, she looked at her with a new perspective. Violetta no longer envied Anya's youth and beauty. Instead, she was happy that Anya had many bright moments ahead of her. They talked for a long time, and to her surprise, Violetta realized that her inner world was rich and interesting. She felt that now she could pass on her knowledge and wisdom to the next generation, and that, too, was a manifestation of her beauty. Part 9. Acceptance and Happiness. A few weeks later, Violetta once again sat by the window, watching the autumn trees, but this time, she didn't feel sadness. Her heart was filled with warmth and peace. She had accepted herself as she was and realized that her beauty hadn't faded with age. It had simply become something different. Now Violetta knew that true beauty lies in love, kindness, and wisdom. And she was grateful for every moment of her life, for all the lessons that the years had taught her.